Well, hey there, I'm Chief Meteorologist Jason Smith here as we're getting into this Wednesday, and we are looking at a situation where we have quieter weather in the tropics. You know, it really started out with a bang with Beryl and a couple other systems that didn't do a whole lot, but Beryl was a bad one. You know, water temperatures were way above normal, so that's the first thing that everybody gravitates towards when they start talking about tropical activity. Is the water warm enough? Yeah, you can check that box because this year water temperatures are running way above normal. In fact, they're record breaking. So we've got the oceanic heat content that's developing for tropical systems, but it requires other factors here for there to be an active season or an active period in the tropics besides just water temperature. You have to look at favorable upper level winds, steering flow, and then, you know, atmospheric moisture is a really big thing. So what we have here is an update with meteorologist Matt Barentine. I talked with Matt about this a little bit today, and it's been something that's been limiting tropical activity in the Atlantic. We've actually seen very little activity. We don't expect any for the next couple weeks. What I can tell you is, though, that the pattern that we have right now is kind of normal for July. And when we get into August, the dry air starts to mix out, and the potential for storms will ramp up, and when it happens, it usually happens really fast. So here's a look at what Matt has to say.
It almost feels like the pause button has been hit on this hurricane season, and for good reason. We've been talking about this the last couple of weeks, why we did not expect any real development through the end of July, and looking ahead, probably won't see much of the way of development for the very first part of August either. But then eventually the switch will flip and we'll get back into the hurricane season going full bore. So what's happened? Well, we've had a lot of Saharan dust across the tropics. We got a large plume that made its way all the way into the Western Gulf, and then the huge plume that is right now across the Atlantic, and then still more of this to come on Africa right now that will continue to work its way out over the tropics. What this plume of dust does is it dries out the atmosphere. It does not allow the little storms to form, and you need those little storms to form to start to coalesce into the big storms that eventually become the tropical storms and the hurricanes. But right now there is a lid on all of that because of these big plumes of Saharan dust. So we've only been through, well, we've been through 3 named storms. We were pretty active at the end of June, the very beginning of July. Alberto, Beryl, and Chris, and then we hit that pause button. The next named storm will be Debbie, and it looks like now that Debbie will not happen until sometime in August, maybe even mid to late August before we get there. But once that switch flips, all the conditions out in the tropics are really good for tropical systems. Once we get rid of that dust sometime in the early part of August, then the switch will flip. And this is pretty typical where we go from a fairly inactive July to a very active August, especially the second half of August. So eventually the switch will flip and we'll get back into hurricane season. So don't fall asleep and don't let the pause fool you. Eventually we'll get back into a very busy situation where a number of storms are going to be possible as we move into the heart of the hurricane season.
So that's what Matt was talking about there, the potential of seeing an active August, but the short term, the next couple of weeks, we may not see much in the tropics. What I've experienced in my experience in tracking storms here at Fox 10 for over 25 years is that, you know, the first week in August even can be really quiet. But as soon as that drier air starts to dissipate over the Atlantic Basin, you can all of a sudden go from seeing nothing going on in the tropics to having multiple active systems just lined up out there in the Atlantic. And the real concern this year is that once we get to that point where we start to have more atmospheric moisture and we start to see those tropical system storms, they could be a little bit stronger than what we would normally see just because the water temperatures are higher and upper level winds are much more favorable than they were last year. We've got the La Nina this year. We had the El Nino last year. So all systems still point to an active season, but we are in a lull. So let's enjoy it. This is a good time to continue to review your hurricane preparations. You know, what would you do if we had a hurricane coming our way? Is it something that you would need to evacuate for? Do you live in a flood zone? Are you in a coastal location? Do you have a hurricane supply kit? Those kind of things. Are you going to board up your house? Do you have the boards? Are they cut? You know, these are things you can be thinking about now while we do have some quiet weather. and some rainy weather across the Gulf Coast. Thanks for joining us here today for Next Weather.